How do you account for your meteoric rise to fame?
I use my pinup type publicity to get my foot in the door.
They were sold as sex symbols, pinups, bombshells. Hollywood's golden age gave us images of women in tight dresses, sultry poses, and carefully manufactured glamour. But behind every publicity photo was a woman who refused to be just a pretty face. Tonight, we're counting down 13 old Hollywood icons who shattered every expectation. We're talking about the real stories the studios didn't want you to know. And trust me, what number 7 accomplished. It literally changed your life today, and you had no idea. But first, let's start with a woman who turned her back on fame at its absolute peak. When Brigitte Bardot appeared in And God Created Woman in 1956, she wasn't just a sensation, she was a scandal. With her tousled blonde hair, pout, and curves, she brought a raw, unapologetic European sensuality that made American censors lose their minds. The studios marketed her measurements, 36-21-35. She became the fantasy, the French bombshell who supposedly embodied pure, carefree sexuality. Magazine covers, paparazzi, constant headlines about her love life. By the 1960s, Brigitte Bardot was one of the most photographed women on earth. She appeared in 47 films, recorded albums that sold millions, and was so famous that the French government used her likeness as the model for Marianne, the national symbol of France. But here's what they don't tell you in those compilations of Hollywood's sexiest stars. Bardot hated being famous. In interviews from that era, she described feeling like a product, not a person. The constant objectification, the invasion of privacy, the reduction of her entire existence to her appearance. It was destroying her mentally. And then, at the height of her fame in 1973, at just 39 years old, Bardot did something almost unthinkable. She walked away completely. Not to take a break, not to find herself and come back for a comeback tour. She retired from entertainment entirely and never looked back. What she did next is extraordinary. Bardot became one of the world's most influential animal rights activists. She founded the Brigitte Bardot Foundation for the Welfare and Protection of Animals in 1986, and over the next 4 decades, she spent millions of her own fortune rescuing animals, lobbied the French government to change animal welfare laws, campaigned against the Canadian seal hunt, bringing international attention to the issue, created shelters across France, fought against bullfighting, animal testing, and fur farming, became such a powerful voice that French politicians had to answer to her. She sold her jewelry at auction, pieces worth millions, to fund animal sanctuaries. She wrote books about animal rights. She met with world leaders not as a celebrity, but as an activist with actual policy demands. Bardot once said, I gave my beauty and my youth to men. I'm going to give my wisdom and experience to animals. Think about that. The woman the world wanted to stay frozen as a sex symbol chose purpose over fame. She weaponized her celebrity status, not for more movie roles, but to protect creatures who had no voice. Hollywood wanted a bombshell. Bardot gave them a revolutionary who proved that walking away from the spotlight can be the most powerful move of all. The studios sold her body. She used her brain to change laws and save lives. That's who Brigitte Bardot really was. They called her the British Marilyn Monroe, and the comparison wasn't subtle. Platinum blonde hair, reported measurements of 37-23-37, tight dresses, provocative publicity stunts. Diane Adores burst onto British cinema screens in the 1950s with films like Yield to the Night, where she played a convicted murderer in a powerful anti-capital punishment drama. But the studio publicity machine focused on one thing, her figure. Press events featured her in swimsuits. Tabloids obsessed over her love life. American studios brought her to Hollywood, hoping to create their own Monroe, putting her in films like I Married a Woman. The image was clear, sexy, blonde, curvy. Another bombshell. Another pretty face. But here's what was actually happening behind those publicity photos. Diane Adores was playing chess while everyone else was playing checkers. she understood something crucial. If they were going to objectify her anyway, she might as well profit from it completely. Dors negotiated her own contracts, unusual for actresses at the time. She demanded profit percentages, not just salaries. When British studios wouldn't meet her terms, she'd work in Italy or America instead, playing studios against each other. By the late 1950s, she was one of the highest-paid actresses in Britain, earning more than most male stars. But Dors didn't just act. She invested heavily in real estate, buying properties across London. She understood that acting careers were temporary, but assets were forever. Where her film career slowed in the 1960s, did she fade away? Not even close. She dominated British television with her own shows, became a successful cabaret performer, touring sold-out venues, wrote an autobiography that became a bestseller, appeared on game shows and talk shows, commanding top fees, made strategic comeback films that kept her culturally relevant. What made Dors truly remarkable was her razor-sharp self-awareness. She knew what the game was, and she played it brilliantly while mocking it the entire time. In interviews, she would deadpan about the absurdity of the sex symbol industry. She once quipped, "The only thing I regret about my past is the length of it." When asked about being compared to Marilyn Monroe, she said, "All they needed was a British girl with blonde hair and a big bosom, and I was it. But I made sure I was paid well for it." She wrote in her memoir about the calculation behind her image. "I knew what sold, so I sold it, but I never sold myself short." Dors was also wickedly intelligent in ways the studios never promoted. She spoke fluent French and Italian, had a reported IQ of 140, read voraciously literature, philosophy, biographies, could quote Shakespeare from memory, wrote poetry. Friends described her as having an encyclopedic memory and being able to discuss politics, art, and history with genuine depth. But when photographers showed up, she'd pose and pout, because that's what paid the bills. And Diana Dors was always about securing the bag. By the time she died in 1984, at age 52, Dors had appeared in over 70 films, built a substantial real estate portfolio, provided financially for her family for generations, and proven that you could play the sex symbol game and win on your own terms. She once said, "I'm not ashamed of what I was. I'm proud of what I became." Hollywood wanted a copy of Marilyn Monroe. Diana Dors gave them a businesswoman who happened to look good in a tight dress and made sure she owned the dress, the camera, and the distribution rights. That's who Diana Dors really was. Betty Page wasn't a Hollywood actress in the traditional sense. She never had a studio contract. She never walked a red carpet at a major premiere. But her image? More iconic than almost anyone who did. With her jet black bangs, radiant smile, and curves that photographers obsessed over, Betty became the queen of pinups in the 1950s. Her measurements, 36-23-36, were published in magazines worldwide. Her photographs range from wholesome beach shots to bondage imagery that scandalized the era. She posed in lingerie, bikinis, and sometimes nothing at all. By the mid-1950s, her photos were everywhere, calendars playing cards, magazines, private collections. She was fantasy personified, the ultimate male fantasy of the 1950s. But here's the wild thing about Betty Page. She didn't see it that way at all. While photographers and audiences projected sexuality onto her images, Betty herself approached modeling as simply a job, one that paid well and gave her freedom. In later interviews, she explained, "I never thought it was shameful. I didn't think of it as being sexy. I just thought of it as art." She grew up in poverty in Nashville, Tennessee. She was one of 6 children in a broken home marked by abuse and instability. She put herself through college, earning a degree with honors by working secretarial jobs. Modeling offered something she'd never had: financial independence and control. Unlike actresses bound by 7-year studio contracts, Betty had agency. She could choose which photographers to work with, negotiate her own rates, walk away from shoots she didn't like, and keep the rights to many of her images. While Hollywood starlets were told what to wear, how to pose, where to appear, and who to date, Betty Page made her own decisions. the bondage photographs that would later become her most famous work. She approached them with curiosity, not trauma. She found the theatrical poses interesting and the photographer, Irving Klaw, respectful and professional. She once explained, "It was just acting like any other role. I was playing a part." Here's where Betty's story gets really interesting. At the height of her fame in 1957, she vanished completely, just disappeared. No farewell, no announcement. She was 34 years old and done. For the next 35 years, nobody knew where Betty Page was or what happened to her. Turns out, she'd become a born-again Christian, married, and lived a quiet life. She worked normal jobs as a secretary in churches. She struggled with mental health issues, including schizophrenia. She had periods of homelessness and hospitalization. Meanwhile, her image exploded in popularity. In the 1980s and 90s, a Betty Page revival happened. Feminist scholars reclaimed her as an icon of sexual agency. Punk and rockabilly subcultures adopted her aesthetic. Fashion designers like Dior and Chanel referenced her style. Museums displayed her photographs as art. Betty Page clothing lines launched, all while the real Betty Page lived in obscurity, having no idea she'd become a cultural phenomenon again. When a journalist finally found her in 1992, Betty was shocked to learn she was famous again. She was living modestly, struggling financially, while her image was making millions for others. What's remarkable is how she responded. She didn't feel exploited or angry. She felt proud. She said, "I never thought I was doing anything wrong. I'm glad people remember me fondly." In her final years, she finally received some compensation for her image and lived more comfortably. She died in 2008 at age 85. Betty Page's real achievement wasn't her appearance. It was what she represented. A woman who posed on her own terms in an era when women had almost no terms. She wasn't manufactured by a studio. She wasn't controlled by agents or contracts. She chose to use her body as she saw fit and walked away when she wanted to. The pinup images that once scandalized America became symbols of female empowerment. Her confidence, her joy in those photographs, inspired generations of women to embrace their own bodies. Fashion icon Dita Von Teese said, "Betty Page showed that you could be sensual and be in control. That was revolutionary. Betty proved that being photographed in lingerie didn't diminish you. Surrendering your agency did. And she never surrendered hers. The studios wanted to own their starlets. Betty Page owned herself. That's who Betty Page really was." When Hedy Lamarr arrived in Hollywood in the late 1930s, the industry didn't know what to do with her. She was too beautiful, dangerously beautiful. Born Hedwig Kiesler in Vienna, she'd already scandalized European cinema with her performance in Ecstasy, where she appeared nude and simulated an orgasm, both firsts in mainstream film. She was 18 years old, with raven hair, luminous skin, and a face that seemed carved by Renaissance sculptors. She was labeled the most beautiful woman in the world. Her measurements, frequently published, were 36-25-36. MGM head Louis B. Mayer brought her to Hollywood, changed her name to Hedy Lamarr, and put her in film after film that showcased her beauty. Algiers, Boomtown, Samson, and Delilah. The studios filmed her like a living painting. Close-ups that lingered, gowns that emphasized every curve, lighting that made her skin glow. Directors said she was too beautiful to act. Critics claimed her beauty distracted from any performance. The message was clear: just stand there and look gorgeous. But here's what Hollywood didn't advertise, didn't promote, and actively tried to suppress. Hedy Lamarr was a certified genius. While the studios were obsessing over her appearance, Lamarr was spending her free time studying engineering and mathematics, reading scientific journals, designing inventions in her home workshop, and corresponding with engineers and scientists. She once said, "Films have a certain place in a certain time period. Technology is forever." During World War II, while still making movies, Lamarr became obsessed with helping the Allied war effort. She was horrified by Nazi Germany. She'd fled Austria to escape her controlling first husband, an arms dealer with Nazi connections. She learned that radio-controlled torpedoes were being jammed by enemies, making them useless. So she invented a solution. Working with composer George Antile, Lamarr developed a secret communications system using frequency-hopping spread spectrum technology. Here's what that means in simple terms. Instead of a signal traveling on one frequency, which could be detected and jammed, their system made the signal hop between 88 different frequencies in a pattern that only the sender and receiver knew. This made the signal nearly impossible to jam, almost impossible to intercept, and extremely secure. They received U.S. Patent 2,292,387 in 1942. You'd think the U.S. military would jump on this technology immediately, right? They didn't. Why? Because Lamarr was just an actress. The Navy literally told her she'd be more useful selling war bonds and looking pretty. One admiral reportedly said, "What does a movie star know about weapon systems?" The patent sat and used for years. Lamarr received no money, no recognition. The patent expired, becoming public domain. Then, decades later, military engineers rediscovered Lamarr's patent. The technology she invented became the foundation for Wi-Fi, Bluetooth, GPS, military communications, and cell phone technology. Read that again. The wireless technology you're probably using right now to watch this video, a Hollywood bombshell invented it in her spare time while making movies. For most of her life, Lamarr received nothing for this world-changing invention. No royalties, no recognition, no Nobel Prize. She continued making films through the 1950s, always typecast as the beautiful one. When her looks faded, Hollywood discarded her. She became a recluse, struggling financially, largely forgotten. It wasn't until 1997, when she was 82 years old, that the Electronic Frontier Foundation finally gave her an award for her invention. By then, she was too frail to attend the ceremony. She died in 2000 at age 85. Hedy Lamarr's story is Hollywood's greatest shame and greatest proof of how brilliance was buried under beauty. She once said, bitterly, "Any girl can be glamorous. All you have to do is stand still and look stupid." It was a direct attack on an industry that demanded exactly that from her. The tragic irony? While they were filming her standing still and looking gorgeous, she was engineering the future. Today, every tech company that uses her technology has generated trillions of dollars. Lamarr died having received almost none of it. Her invention is used billions of times per day by billions of people, and most have no idea a 1940s film actress created it. In recent years, Lamarr's genius has finally been recognized. She was inducted into the National Inventors Hall of Fame. Documentaries have told her real story. Tech companies have honored her contribution. November 9th is now Hedy Lamarr Day in Germany, and her face appeared on Austrian currency. But imagine if Hollywood had promoted her mind as much as her face. Imagine if the Navy had listened. Imagine if she'd received even a fraction of the wealth her invention created. Hedy Lamarr proves the devastating cost of reducing brilliant women to their appearance. They sold her as a bombshell. She was a genius who literally changed the world. That's who Hedy Lamarr really was. And that's only number 10. Wait until you see what's coming. When Gina Lollobrigida strutted onto screens in the 1950s, she wasn't just another starlet. She was a Mediterranean earthquake. Born in Italy and nicknamed La Lalo, she embodied a very specific type of European sensuality that Hollywood hadn't quite seen before. With measurements reported as 38, 24, 38, and an hourglass figure that seemed geometrically impossible, she became one of the most sought-after stars of the 1950s and 60s. Her breakthrough came with Bread, Love, and Dreams, an Italian comedy that made her a superstar across Europe. Hollywood came calling, putting her in films with Frank Sinatra in Never So Few, and Rock Hudson in Come September. The rivalry between her and Sophia Loren became legendary. Two Italian beauties constantly compared, their measurements analyzed, their box office numbers pitted against each other. Magazine covers obsessed over her curves. Publicity stills emphasized her figure. The message another beautiful Italian woman for audiences to admire. But Gina Lollobrigida was never content to be just a pretty face. From the beginning, she made strategic career decisions. She turned down a long-term Hollywood contract to maintain independence. She chose European films that paid her more and gave her creative input. She negotiated profit percentages, not just salaries. She worked across multiple countries, never letting one market define her. When asked about her beauty, she famously declared, "I am not a star. I am a planet." And she meant it. She wasn't going to orbit around anyone else's career or conform to anyone else's system. Here's where Gina's story gets fascinating. In the late 1960s, as her film career began to slow, she was in her 40s, and Hollywood has never been kind to aging actresses. Lollobrigida did something unexpected. She became a photojournalist, not as a hobby, as a serious profession. She studied photography, learned the craft, and began shooting for major magazines including Life, Stern, and Paris Match. Her subjects weren't red carpets or fashion spreads. She photographed Fidel Castro by spending weeks in Cuba for an exclusive interview, Paul Newman, Salvador Dali, Audrey Hepburn, Henry Kissinger, and the ruins of Pompeii for a documentary project. What's remarkable is that she wasn't treated as a celebrity dabbling in photography. She was taken seriously as a journalist. Her Castro interview and photo essay was a major international scoop. She got access that professional photojournalists couldn't secure. Why? Because she was smart enough to leverage her fame to open doors, then professional enough to deliver legitimate work. Critics who expected vanity projects were stunned by the quality of her photography. The composition, the lighting, the ability to capture intimate moments with guarded subjects. But Lollobrigida didn't stop there. She also became a sculptor. She created bronze and marble sculptures that were exhibited in galleries across Europe. Major museums acquired her work. She had showings in Paris, Moscow, and Rome. Again, not a celebrity hobby. Serious artistic work that was judged on its own merits. In 1999, at age 72, Lollobrigida ran for a seat in the European Parliament with the Italian Democratic Party. She didn't win, but the campaign demonstrated her continued political engagement and refusal to fade quietly. She later served as a goodwill ambassador for the UN Food and Agriculture Organization, traveling to developing nations and advocating for agricultural development and fighting hunger. She was also ruthlessly smart about money. She invested in real estate across Italy, owned valuable jewelry collections, built a substantial art collection, licensed her name and image strategically, and controlled her estate planning carefully. When she died in 2023 at age 95, her estate was worth an estimated 45 million euros, and a legal battle over it made international headlines. Gina Lollobrigida's true legacy isn't the measurements or the rivalry with Sophia Loren or the sexy Italian bombshell image. It's that she completely reinvented herself multiple times. From actress to photojournalist, from film star to sculptor, from entertainer to diplomat, from employee to businesswoman. She refused to let Hollywood define her expiration date. When they stopped offering her leading roles, she didn't fight for smaller parts. She found entirely new careers where she could excel. She once said, "I've always been against the image of the stupid woman. I'm an intelligent woman who happens to be beautiful." Hollywood sold her body. Gina Lollobrigida built an empire and multiple careers that had nothing to do with her appearance. She wasn't orbiting anyone. She was the planet. That's who Gina Lollobrigida really was. Jane Russell's entry into Hollywood is one of the industry's wildest stories. Discovered by eccentric billionaire Howard Hughes, she made her film debut in The Outlaw, a Western that became infamous not for its plot, but for Russell's curves. Hughes, obsessed with Russell's bust line, reportedly designed a special cantilevered bra to emphasize her chest. The publicity was insane. Her measurements, 38, 24, 36, were plastered across every advertisement. The film was so controversial that it was held up by censors for 3 years before getting a limited release. Hughes used the scandal brilliantly, making Russell famous before audiences had even seen the film. When it finally premiered, Audiences packed theaters not for the Western plot, but to see the woman who broke the production code. Here's the twist. Russell later admitted she never wore Hughes' famous bra. It was uncomfortable and didn't work. She wore her own bra throughout filming, but she understood the game. She knew the bra story was great publicity, so she went along with it for years before finally revealing the truth in her autobiography. This reveals something crucial about Russell. She was media savvy from the beginning. Russell's defining role came in Gentlemen Prefer Blondes opposite Marilyn Monroe. The pairing was strategic, Monroe as the soft, breathy blonde, Russell as the earthy, wisecracking brunette. Both were marketed as bombshells, but the contrast was deliberate. Their musical numbers, Monroe singing Diamonds Are a Girl's Best Friend, Russell belting Ain't There Anyone Here for Love, showcased their different energies. On set, the two actresses became genuine friends. When Monroe struggled with anxiety and the studio mistreated her, Russell advocated for her, using her own power to protect the younger actress. This wasn't competition. It was solidarity. Behind the scenes, Russell was building an entertainment empire. In 1955, she and her husband formed Russfield Productions, one of the first production companies formed by an actress. Through this company, she produced her own films, negotiated ownership stakes, controlled her image and career, made back-end profit deals, and hired crew members she wanted to work with. This was extremely rare for actresses in the 1950s. Most were locked into studio contracts with no creative control. Russell refused that system. Her production company made films including The Fuzzy Pink Nightgown and The King and Four Queens. Some succeeded, others flopped, but the point was ownership. But Russell's business ventures went far beyond film production. She launched the Jane Russell Lingerie Company in the 1970s. Not a celebrity endorsement deal, but a company she co-owned and actively managed. The genius of this business. Russell understood that most lingerie was designed for thin, small-busted women. She created a line specifically for full-figured women, providing better support and fit. The company became hugely successful, selling in major department stores nationwide. Russell appeared in her own ads, even in her 50s and 60s, and marketed to real women and built a multi-million-dollar business. She held patents on some of the bra designs. She oversaw production. She negotiated distribution deals. This wasn't a vanity project. It was a legitimate business empire. Russell's most personal and impactful work came from tragedy. After struggling with infertility and multiple miscarriages, she and her husband adopted 3 children in the 1950s. The adoption process was difficult, bureaucratic, and emotionally grueling. Russell decided to change the system. In 1955, she founded WAIF, or the World Adoption International Fund, an organization dedicated to placing hard-to-adopt children, like children with disabilities, older children, minority children, helping families navigate international adoptions, advocating for adoption reform, and providing financial assistance to adoptive families. She dedicated decades to this work, personally financing much of the organization, traveling internationally to facilitate adoptions, and lobbying government officials for policy changes. Over the years, WAIF helped place thousands of children with families. Russell's advocacy changed adoption laws in multiple states. Russell was also a devout Christian who spoke openly about her faith, unusual for Hollywood. She sang gospel music and recorded Christian albums, performed at Billy Graham crusades, spoke at churches about faith in Hollywood, and used her platform to promote religious tolerance. Whether you share her beliefs or not, she used her celebrity status to promote causes she cared about rather than just collecting paychecks. When Jane Russell died in 2011 at age 89, the obituaries focused on the outlaw and Gentlemen Prefer Blondes. But her real achievements were building a production company when women had almost no industry power, creating a successful lingerie business empire, revolutionizing adoption services, and placing thousands of children, advocating for her fellow actresses, and controlling her own image and career for decades. She once said, "They held up the outlaw for years." And Howard Hughes had me doing publicity for it every day, 5 days a week for 5 years. I had to be a star by the time the picture opened. That quote reveals her understanding. Hollywood was a business, and she was going to run her part of it like a CEO. The studios sold her as a scandalous bombshell. Jane Russell built an empire, changed laws, and placed thousands of children in loving homes. That's who Jane Russell really was. There's one image of Anita Ekberg that everyone knows, even if they don't know her name. A statuesque blonde in a black strapless gown, wading through Rome's Trevi Fountain, arms outstretched, water cascading around her while Marcello Mastroianni watches in awe. It's the most iconic scene from Federico Fellini's La Dolce Vita, and it turned Ekberg into a symbol of Italian cinema's golden age. Born in Sweden, Ekberg stood 5 feet 7 inches with reported measurements of 39, 24, 36. She entered Hollywood after winning Miss Sweden in 1950 and competing in a Miss Universe pageant. Her height, her curves, her blonde Scandinavian beauty made her instantly marketable. Studios put her in films like Blood Alley with John Wayne and War and Peace with Audrey Hepburn and Henry Fonda. But Hollywood didn't know what to do with her. She was too tall, too curvaceous, too European. They cast her as the sexy foreign woman over and over. Here's where Ekberg's story diverges from expectations. She walked away from Hollywood, not because she failed, not because she couldn't get work, but because she chose art over commerce. In the late 1950s, European cinema was undergoing a revolution. Directors like Fellini, Michelangelo Antonioni, and Ingmar Bergman were making films that treated cinema as an art form, not just entertainment. Ekberg was offered both: more Hollywood paychecks in forgettable films, or European art films that paid less but offered something deeper. She chose Europe. Working with Fellini on La Dolce Vita changed Ekberg's career and life. The Trevi Fountain scene wasn't just about her beauty. It was a meditation on desire, illusion, and the emptiness of modern life. Ekberg played Sylvia, an American film star who embodies unattainable fantasy. Fellini wasn't exploiting Ekberg's figure. He was examining how society projects fantasies on a beautiful woman and how isolating that experience is. In one scene, Sylvia climbs the dome of St. Peter's Basilica while photographers and journalists chase her, treating her like prey. It's a commentary on celebrity culture that was decades ahead of its time. The famous fountain scene? Shot in February. The water was freezing. Ekberg stood in that fountain for hours while Fellini got the shots he wanted. She later developed pneumonia, but she never complained, understanding that they were creating something meaningful. Years later, she said, "Fellini made me feel like I was part of something important, not just decoration." After La Dolce Vita, Ekberg continued choosing European art films over Hollywood spectacles. Boccaccio 70, 4 for Texas, and The Alphabet Murders. She worked with directors across Italy, France, Germany, and Sweden, often in films that prioritize story and character over spectacle. Did these films pay as well as Hollywood? No. Did they make her as famous in America? No. Did she care? Also no. Ekberg's choice to prioritize artistic integrity over commercial success came with costs. She made less money than she could have and became less famous in America. As she aged, roles became scarce and had financial struggles in later life. By the 1970s, her film career had mostly ended. She moved back to Italy permanently, living in Genzano, a small town outside Rome. Ekberg spent her final decades largely out of the spotlight. She lived modestly in Italy, occasionally appeared at film festivals, gave interviews reflecting on her career, struggled with health issues and financial problems, and experienced a house fire in 2011 that destroyed many of her possessions. When she died in 2015 at age 83, she was largely forgotten by mainstream audiences. But here's what Anita Ekberg actually achieved. She chose meaning over money. In an industry that constantly pressured actresses to take the highest paycheck, to stay commercially viable, to compromise artistic vision for box office success, Ekberg said no. She worked with one of cinema's greatest directors and created an image that remains culturally significant 60-plus years later. Film students still study La Dolce Vita. The Trevi Fountain scene is analyzed in film theory courses worldwide. Ekberg could have made forgettable Hollywood films for decades, earning more money and fame. Instead, she chose to create one perfect artistic moment that transcended her beauty. She once said, "I don't regret anything. I did what I wanted to do, not what the studios wanted me to do." In an industry built on compromise, that's revolutionary. Hollywood wanted another blonde bombshell. Anita Ekberg became a symbol of artistic cinema and the cost of choosing authenticity. That's who Anita Ekberg really was. One image defined the 1960s and changed Raquel Welch's life forever. A photograph of her in a fur bikini from 1 million years BC. She had maybe 3 lines of dialogue in the film. The plot was absurd. But that poster, Welch in prehistoric cave girl attire, hands on hips, fierce and powerful, became one of the best-selling posters of all time. Overnight, Welch went from unknown actress to international sex symbol. Her measurements, 37, 22, 35, were published worldwide. She appeared on magazine covers globally. The studios had their new bombshell, but Welch quickly realized she was trapped by that image. Studios wanted her to play variations of the same role. The exotic beauty, the sexy foreigner, the woman whose primary function was to look good in costumes. She fought back. She took acting classes. She demanded better roles. She turned down films that were pure exploitation. When she got roles in Bandolero with James Stewart and 100 Rifles with Jim Brown, she proved she could act. But critics couldn't see past her appearance. Reviews focused on her body, not her performance. Welch realized something crucial. If Hollywood was going to objectify her body anyway, she would take control of the narrative. In 1984, she released Raquel Welch's Total Beauty and Fitness program, a book and accompanying video series that revolutionized how women approach fitness. This wasn't a celebrity cash grab. It was a comprehensive fitness program developed with trainers, nutritionists, and medical professionals. The program included yoga, Pilates exercises, strength training for women, nutritional guidance, mental wellness practices, and flexibility routines. Welch's fitness program came at a perfect cultural moment. In the 1980s, the fitness boom was beginning, but most programs focused on extreme thinness or traditionally masculine bodybuilding. Welch offered something different: strength and wellness for women. Her message: you can be strong, fit, and healthy while still celebrating your feminine body. The book became a bestseller. The video sold millions of copies. Women wrote letters describing how the program changed their lives, not just physically, but emotionally. Welch had transformed from sex symbol to fitness guru, using her platform to promote women's health and strength. But Welch didn't stop with fitness videos. She built a licensing empire. Raquel Welch Wigs, a wig and hair extension line that became hugely successful. Fitness equipment, home exercise products bearing her name, beauty products, skincare and cosmetics lines, clothing lines, fashion collections sold through major retailers. She wasn't just endorsing products. She was co-developing and co-owning many of these businesses, ensuring she received significant profits rather than just appearance fees. What's remarkable about Raquel Welch is her sustained relevance across decades. 1960s became a sex symbol. 1970s fought for better acting roles. 1980s launched fitness empire. 1990s to 2000s continued acting, appearing in TV and film. And 2010s, still working, still culturally relevant. At age 60, she appeared on the cover of Men's Health magazine, looking incredible. How? Because she'd been following her own fitness program for decades. Welch's relationship with feminism was complicated. She initially rejected the sex symbol label as limiting, but she also didn't align with 1970s feminism that sometimes suggested celebrating feminine beauty was anti-feminist. Her position: I'm not a women's libyer. I believe in being feminine. This caused controversy, but Welch was making a different argument. that strength and femininity weren't contradictory. You could be sexy and powerful, beautiful and accomplished. Her fitness program embodied this, celebrating women's bodies while emphasizing strength, health, and capability. When Raquel Welch died in February 2023 at age 82, the obituaries mentioned the fur bikini poster. But her real legacy was pioneering fitness programs that emphasized women's strength, building a business empire worth millions, maintaining career relevance across 6 decades, proving you could control the sex symbol narrative, and inspiring women to embrace both beauty and power. She once said, "I was not brought up to be a sex symbol, but if the public wants to make me one, the least I can do is to control the image." And control it she did. Hollywood wanted a poster girl in a fur bikini. Raquel Welch became a fitness revolutionary who changed how women approach their bodies. That's who Raquel Welch really was. They called her the love goddess. In the 1940s, Rita Hayworth's image was everywhere, in magazines, on posters, painted on the side of airplanes during World War II. Her most famous film, Gilda, features the iconic moment when she peels off a long black glove while singing "Put the Blame on Me." She barely shows any skin, but the scene was so charged with sensuality that censors tried to ban it. With red hair, perfect features, and measurements of 37, 24, 36, Hayworth became a fantasy woman for an entire generation of American men. But here's what they don't tell you about Rita Hayworth. The woman you saw on screen was completely manufactured, and the process of creating her nearly destroyed the real person underneath. Rita Hayworth was born Margarita Carmen Cancino in Brooklyn to Spanish dancer parents. She was a gifted dancer who started performing at age 12 in her father's dance company. She was talented, hardworking, and devoted to dance as an art form. When Hollywood discovered her in the 1930s, they saw potential, but not as Margarita Cancino. She was too Spanish, too ethnic, too dark, so they erased her identity. They changed her name from Margarita Cancino to Rita Hayworth. They forced her to undergo painful electrolysis to raise her hairline and make her forehead appear larger. They made her dye her naturally black hair red. They lightened her skin tone in makeup. They taught her to speak without any hint of accent. They pressured her to distance herself from her Spanish heritage. The electrolysis was particularly brutal. Sessions where electricity was used to permanently remove hair from her hairline. It was painful, time-consuming, and damaging. Rita later said, "They changed me so much I didn't know who I was anymore. But the transformation went deeper than appearance." Rita's father, Eduardo Cancino, had been sexually abusing her since childhood. This abuse continued even after she became famous, with Eduardo managing her early career and controlling her life. When she married at age 18 to escape her father, her husband, Edward Judson, was controlling and abusive in different ways, managing her career, controlling her finances, and reportedly physically abusing her. Then came her most famous marriage to Orson Welles, the brilliant director of Citizen Kane. While Welles respected her talent, he cast her in The Lady from Shanghai. The marriage was tumultuous. Rita later said Welles was more in love with filmmaking than with her. Her third marriage to Prince Ali Khan produced her daughter Princess Yasmin, but ended in divorce after his infidelities. What people forget about Rita Hayworth: she was an exceptional dancer. She trained extensively and performed complex dance routines that rivaled any dancer of her era. In films like You'll Never Get Rich with Fred Astaire, You Were Never Lovelier with Fred Astaire, and CoverGirl with Gene Kelly, she held her own against two of the greatest dancers in Hollywood history. Fred Astaire said, "Rita danced with trained perfection and individuality. She was better when she danced than when she acted, but Hollywood rarely emphasized her dancing skills. The focus was always her beauty, her sex appeal, her status as a love goddess." Rita's most famous quote reveals her pain. "Men go to bed with Gilda, but wake up with me." Think about what that means. She was saying that men didn't want the real her. They wanted the fantasy Hollywood had created. Even her husband seemed more interested in Rita Hayworth the star than Margarita Cancino the person. In the 1960s and 70s, Rita's behavior became increasingly erratic. She forgot lines on set. She had mood swings and confusion, and she was often drunk on set. Studios stopped hiring her. Everyone assumed she was an alcoholic. The press mocked her. Her reputation was destroyed. The truth, which wasn't diagnosed until 1980, Rita had early-onset Alzheimer's disease. She'd been suffering from it for years while people assumed she was just drunk or difficult. The woman who had been the love goddess spent her final years unable to remember who she was, cruelly fitting given how Hollywood had erased her original identity. Rita's daughter, Princess Yasmin Aga Khan, became her caretaker and used her mother's tragedy to create something meaningful. She became a leading advocate for Alzheimer's awareness and research, helping to destigmatize the disease, raise millions for research, increase public understanding of early-onset Alzheimer's, and advocate for caregiver support. Princess Yasmin has said, "My mother's legacy shouldn't be just her beauty. It should be the awareness her illness brought to a devastating disease." Rita Hayworth died in 1987 at age 68, having spent nearly a decade unable to recognize her own daughter. Her real story isn't about being a love goddess. It's about a talented dancer whose ethnic identity was erased. A woman reshaped by an industry that valued appearance over humanity. A survivor of childhood sexual abuse and domestic violence. An artist whose talents were overshadowed by her looks. And a tragedy that advanced Alzheimer's research. Rita once said, "I think all women have a certain elegance about them which is destroyed when they take off their clothes." She was talking about the film industry's constant push to sexualize her, to reduce her to a body rather than a person. Hollywood created Rita Hayworth and destroyed Margarita Cancino in the process. That's the real story of Rita Hayworth. Before Marilyn Monroe, before Jane Mansfield, before Madonna, or any modern celebrity who built a career on sexual provocation, there was Mae West. And she did it first, did it better, and did it entirely on her own terms. Mae West became famous in her late 30s and 40s, ancient by Hollywood standards, because she refused to compromise. With platinum blonde hair, a curvy figure at reportedly 36, 26, 36, and a way of moving that suggested sex without ever being explicit, West strutted onto screens in the early 1930s and scandalized America. But here's what made Mae West different from every other sex symbol. She wrote her own material. Before Hollywood, Mae West was a successful Broadway playwright and performer who wrote plays that were so sexually provocative they got her arrested. Her 1926 play Sex, yes, that was the actual title, was deemed so obscene that West was sentenced to 10 days in jail for corrupting the morals of youth. She served the time, and then used the publicity to promote her next play. Her 1927 play, The Drag, featured gay characters portrayed sympathetically. In 1927, it was too controversial to even open in New York. West understood something crucial. Scandal sells, and if you control the scandal, you control your career. When West arrived in Hollywood in 1932 at age 38, she did something almost no other actress had ever done. She wrote her own films and negotiated complete creative control. Her contract with Paramount Pictures stipulated that she had script approval, director approval, co-star approval, control over her wardrobe, and final cut approval. This was unheard of for actresses in the 1930s. Studio heads had absolute power, but West refused to work any other way. Mae West's specialty was the sexual double entendre, lines that sounded innocent but carried obvious sexual innuendo. Her most famous lines: "Why don't you come up sometime and see me? Is that a gun in your pocket? Or are you just happy to see me? When I'm good, I'm very good. But when I'm bad, I'm better. I used to be Snow White, but I drifted." These lines became cultural touchstones. She weaponized innuendo, saying things censors couldn't technically ban because the words themselves were innocent. The meaning was all in the delivery. West's films saved Paramount Pictures from bankruptcy during the Great Depression. Her first film, Night After Night, wasn't even written for her. She was a supporting character, but she rewrote all her scenes, and her performance stole the film. Her second film, She Done Him Wrong, which she wrote herself, became one of the highest-grossing films of the year and earned an Academy Award nomination for Best Picture. She was paid $480,000 per film in the mid-1930s, equivalent to about $10 million today. She was the highest-paid woman in America across any industry, not just entertainment. And she negotiated back-end profit participation, meaning she made money every time her films were re-released. Mae West's success terrified moral guardians. She was the primary reason the Hays Code, Hollywood's self-censorship system, was strictly enforced starting in 1934. Religious groups, women's organizations, and government officials demanded that Hollywood stop letting Mae West corrupt America's youth. The Hays Code specifically prohibited sexually suggestive dialogue, characters who profited from immoral behavior, and lack of moral consequences for sin. This was aimed directly at West's films, where she played sexually confident women who never apologized and never got punished. But West was too smart to be stopped. She worked around the code, finding new ways to be suggestive without being explicit. She turned censorship into a creative challenge. What's remarkable about Mae West? Her career spanned 7 decades. In the 1900s to 1910s, vaudeville performer. 1920s, Broadway playwright and star. 1930s, Hollywood superstar. 1940s, 60s, radio, occasional films, nightclub performances. 1970s, comeback films. She made her final film, Sextet, at age 85, playing a sex symbol married to a much younger man, still delivering double entendres, still in control. Mae West's relationship with feminism is complicated but significant. She predated the feminist movement but embodied many of its principles. She had complete control over her image and career, sexual agency without shame, financial independence, refused to conform to male expectations, and used her sexuality as power, not submission. She said, "I never loved another person the way I loved myself." In the 1930s, that was a revolutionary statement for a woman. She also said, "I speak 2 languages, English and body." Modern feminists sometimes critique West for playing into male fantasies, but others argue she controlled those fantasies and profited from them entirely on her own terms. When Mae West died in 1980 at age 87, she left an estate worth millions, every penny of which she'd earned and managed herself. Her real achievements: first major female screenwriter in Hollywood, highest paid woman in America, challenged censorship and won, created a persona she fully controlled for 70 years, proved women could be sexual and powerful, and made homosexuality visible in American theater. The studios wanted to control her. Mae West said no and became wealthier and more famous than almost anyone who tried. Hollywood wanted a blonde bombshell. Mae West gave them a genius businesswoman who happened to look good in a tight dress because she chose the dress. That's who Mae West really was. Sophia Loren wasn't just an actress. She was, and remains, a living monument to survival, determination, and the power of refusing to be broken. Born Sophia, sick alone in Rome in 1934, she grew up in devastating poverty in Nazi-occupied Italy during World War II. Her mother was unmarried, and Sophia was considered illegitimate, facing social stigma her entire childhood. They lived in a single room. They often went hungry. During Allied bombing raids, they hid in railroad tunnels. When Hollywood discovered her in the 1950s, they saw a Mediterranean goddess, with measurements reported as 38, 24, 38, glossy dark hair, and eyes that seemed to contain centuries of wisdom. She became the embodiment of Italian beauty. But Sophia Loren's measurements were never the most interesting thing about her. The media tried desperately to create a rivalry between Sophia Loren and Gina Lollobrigida, 2 Italian beauties, both curvy, both successful, who must hate each other, right? Except they didn't. While magazines published side-by-side photos comparing their figures and tabloids invented feuds, both women refused to play that game. Loren later said, "We were never rivals. The press needed a story. We gave them our work instead." This refusal to tear down other women was rare in an industry that pitted actresses against each other constantly. What separated Loren from many bombshells was her extraordinary acting ability. She didn't just look beautiful on camera. She transformed into characters with depth and complexity. Her breakthrough role in Two Women told the story of a mother protecting her daughter during World War II, a role that drew directly from Loren's own wartime experiences. Her performance was raw, unglamorous, and devastating. There are no sexy dresses, no sultry poses, just brilliant acting. She won the Academy Award for Best Actress, becoming the first actress to win an Oscar for a foreign language film. Sophia Loren is famous for saying, "Everything you see, I owe to spaghetti." People laugh at this quote, treating it as a cute one-liner about her curves. But it's actually much deeper. She was saying, "I come from poverty where we barely had food. Now I have enough to eat, enough to thrive. My body reflects survival and abundance after starvation." It was a joke that contained trauma and triumph. Loren made strategic choices that many bombshells didn't. She refused to be locked into Hollywood contracts, maintaining independence to work in European cinema, where directors gave her better roles. She worked with the greatest directors of the era, Vittorio De Sica, Charlie Chaplin, and Martin Ritt. She balanced commercial films that paid well with artistic films that earned critical acclaim. One of Hollywood's most famous almost romances was between Sophia Loren and Cary Grant. They co-starred in The Pride and the Passion and Houseboat. Grant, 30 years older and already a legend, fell deeply in love with Loren. He proposed marriage. He was wealthy, powerful, one of the biggest stars in the world. She said no. Why? Because she was in love with Italian film producer Carlo Ponti, who was married and couldn't offer her the glamorous Hollywood life Grant could. Loren chose love over convenience. She married Ponti in 1966, and they remained married until his death in 2007, over 40 years. What many don't know, Sophia Loren suffered multiple miscarriages and struggled desperately to have children. In 1968, pregnant with her first child, she spent months on bed rest to prevent another miscarriage. She literally didn't move from bed for the final months of her pregnancy. She finally gave birth to Carlo Ponti Jr. in 1968, then Eduardo Ponti in 1973. She later said, "Having children was more important to me than any Oscar." In an industry that often forced actresses to choose between career and family, Loren refused to choose. She adjusted her career around motherhood, turning down roles during her children's early years and resuming when ready. Like many women on this list, Loren didn't just act, she built an empire. Sophia Loren Eyewear, a successful eyeglass and sunglasses line. Perfume lines, multiple fragrances bearing her name. Cookbooks, best-selling books sharing Italian recipes. Restaurants, she opened restaurants bearing her name. And licensing deals, strategic partnerships that paid royalties. She understood her name had value and licensed it carefully. Sophia Loren's career has spanned 70-plus years. In the 1950s, Italian cinema star. 1960s, international superstar and Oscar winner. 1970s, 80s, continued film work. 1990s, comeback films and TV movies. 2000s to 2010s, occasional roles, mostly retired. 2020, returned at age 86 in The Life Ahead, which was directed by her son. At 86, she delivered a performance that reminded the world why she won that Oscar decades earlier. Sophia Loren's true legacy. Survived Nazi occupation and extreme poverty. Became one of the greatest actresses of all time. Won an Oscar, multiple Golden Globes, BAFTAs. Refused to be reduced to her appearance. Built a business empire. Maintained a 40-plus year marriage. Raised 2 sons. And worked in her late 80s. She proved you could be beautiful and talented, sexy and respected, a mother and a career woman. At 90 years old, Sophia Loren is still alive, still elegant, still commanding respect. Hollywood wanted a Mediterranean sex symbol. Sophia Loren became royalty, not through marriage, but through talent, determination, and absolute refusal to be anything less than extraordinary. That's who Sophia Loren is. If Hollywood had a high priestess of curves, it was Jayne Mansfield. Her measurements, 40, 21, 35, became legendary. Her publicity stunts were outrageous. Her wardrobe malfunctions seemed to happen at every public appearance. In an era when Marilyn Monroe was already the definition of bombshell, Mansfield arrived like an atom bomb, threatening to eclipse everyone with sheer spectacle. She appeared in films like The Girl Can't Help It and Will Success Spoil Rock Hunter? But honestly, the films almost didn't matter. Mansfield was famous, for being photographed, for being impossible to ignore. Tabloids couldn't get enough. Every public appearance became a photo opportunity. She knew exactly what she was doing, leaning into the bombshell persona with deliberate calculation. But here's what they never told you. Jayne Mansfield had a reported IQ of 163, genius level. While studios marketed her as the ultimate dumb blonde, Mansfield was fluent in 5 languages: English, French, Spanish, German, and Italian. Classically trained, she studied violin and piano. Highly educated, she attended multiple universities studying drama and the arts. Well-read, friends describe her home library as extensive. And business-minded, she understood publicity and marketing at an expert level. She once said in an interview, "People think I'm dumb because I act that way in movies. Acting dumb is a lot harder than acting smart." Mansfield understood something crucial. In the 1950s, being the sexiest woman alive was marketable. Being the smartest? Not so much. So she played dumb while being brilliant. She engineered her own publicity stunts. She negotiated her own contracts. She understood how to manipulate the media cycle. She built a personal brand before personal branding existed. Her rivalry with Marilyn Monroe, manufactured for publicity. Monroe was the established bombshell. Mansfield positioned herself as the younger, caviar, more outrageous alternative. Every time Monroe was in the news, Mansfield found a way to be in the news too. Was it desperate? Maybe. Was it brilliant marketing? Absolutely. But behind the publicity machine was a woman struggling with multiple marriages: Paul Mansfield, Mickey Hargitay, Matt Simber, plus 2 more brief marriages. Financial instability. Despite earning good money, she spent extravagantly on a mansion called the Pink Palace, expensive cars, designer wardrobes, lavish parties, supporting her children and various ex-husbands. In career frustration, Mansfield desperately wanted to be taken seriously as an actress. As her film career declined in the 1960s, Mansfield had to take increasingly exploitative work. Low-budget European films, nightclub appearances, promotional tours, any work that paid. She became one of the first major American actresses to appear nude on film in Promises. Promises, a decision born from financial desperation rather than artistic choice. While this was presented as liberation, it was actually evidence of how limited her options had become. On June 29, 1967, Jayne Mansfield was traveling from a nightclub performance in Mississippi to New Orleans at 2 a.m. Her car, driven by her boyfriend with her 3 children in the back seat, including a young Mariska Hargitay, who would later star in Law & Order, SVU, crashed into a slow-moving tractor-trailer. Mansfield, her boyfriend, and the driver were killed instantly. She was 34 years old. Her 3 children in the back seat survived with minor injuries. The circumstances of her death sparked rumors that she was decapitated. She wasn't, but the rumors persist. More importantly, her death led to federal safety regulations. The Mansfield bar, the rear under-eye guard now required on all tractor-trailers, was mandated because of her accident. It prevents cars from sliding under trucks in rear-end collisions. So Jayne Mansfield's death literally changed safety laws and has saved countless lives. Jayne Mansfield's story is a tragedy of wasted potential. A genius-level intellect reduced to playing dumb. A talented actress typecast by her appearance. a savvy businesswoman who still ended up broke, and a mother of 5 who died young. Her daughter, Mariska Hargitay, has said, "My mother was brilliant, not in the way Hollywood wanted her to be, which is why they didn't know what to do with her." Think about that. A woman with an IQ of 163, fluent in 5 languages, classically trained in music, was marketed as a joke, the dumb blonde with big boobs. Hollywood killed Jane Mansfield long before that car accident. They killed her potential, her intellect, her artistic ambitions, reducing her to measurements and publicity stunts. The studios wanted the ultimate bombshell. Jane Mansfield was a genius who played the game to survive, and it destroyed her. That's who Jane Mansfield really was. And that brings us to number 1. At the very top of our list stands Marilyn Monroe. Not because she was the most accomplished, not because she lived the longest, but because her image represents everything about how Hollywood commodifies, consumes, and destroys women. Everyone knows the image: platinum blonde hair, red lips, beauty mark, white dress billowing over a subway grate, breathless voice, curves that defined an era. Her measurements, 36, 23, 36, were published everywhere. That scene in The 7-Year Itch with a white dress became one of cinema's most iconic images. She starred in films like Gentlemen Prefer Blondes, How to Marry a Millionaire, and Some Like It Hot. She was the definition of a 1950s bombshell. But Marilyn Monroe was never supposed to exist. Marilyn Monroe was born Norma Jean Mortensen in Los Angeles in 1926. Her childhood was brutal. Mother institutionalized for mental illness. Never knew her father. Grew up in foster homes and an orphanage. Sexually abused as a child. And married at 16 to escape the foster system. Norma Jean was a brunette with a plain face and a difficult life. She was nothing like Marilyn Monroe. Hollywood created Marilyn Monroe by bleaching her hair platinum blonde, teaching her to walk differently, training her to speak in a breathy whisper, changing her name completely, and creating an entire persona from scratch. Norma Jean disappeared. Marilyn Monroe replaced her. Studios marketed Monroe as the ultimate dumb blonde. Beautiful, but intellectually empty. Sexually available, but emotionally shallow. Roles were written specifically to emphasize this. The gold digger, the showgirl, the pretty distraction. But the real Norma Jean was well-read. She owned over 400 books, her personal library sold at auction. Intellectually curious. She read Dostoevsky, Tolstoy, James Joyce. Politically aware. She was friends with poet Carl Sandburg. And ambitious. She desperately wanted to be taken seriously as an actress. She famously said, "I don't mind being a dumb blonde, but I'd rather just be me, whatever that is." The tragedy? She never got to find out. What Monroe wanted more than anything was to be respected as a serious actress. In 1955, she did something unprecedented. She walked away from Hollywood at the height of her fame. She moved to New York and studied at the Actors Studio under Lee Strasberg. She formed Marilyn Monroe Productions, one of the first production companies owned by an actress. She demanded better roles. She refused to make another dumb blonde film. This was revolutionary. Actresses didn't walk away from studios. They didn't form production companies. They didn't have leverage. But Monroe was so valuable that Fox had to negotiate. She won. Script approval, director approval, and better pay. Monroe's marriages reveal her search for something Hollywood couldn't give her. Joe DiMaggio, the legendary baseball player, wanted a traditional wife. Monroe wanted a career. It lasted 9 months. DiMaggio wanted her to quit acting, stay home, be his trophy. When photographers took that famous photo of Monroe's dress blowing up, DiMaggio was furious at the public display of his wife. Arthur Miller, the Pulitzer Prize-winning playwright, represented intellectualism and respectability. Monroe hoped marrying Miller would prove she was more than a dumb blonde. Miller initially seemed to see her depth, but his play After the Fall, written after their divorce, portrayed her as mentally unstable and manipulative. She was devastated by his betrayal. Throughout her career, Monroe fought constantly with studios. She was chronically late to set due to anxiety and perfectionism. She required dozens of takes, which shows her insecurity about her performance. She fired directors she didn't respect. She walked off productions. She demanded script changes. Was she difficult? Yes. Was she standing up for herself in an industry that treated her like property? Also yes. Billy Wilder, who directed Some Like It Hot, said, "I have an aunt who's 85. She's difficult, but Marilyn is worth it." Even as he complained about her behavior, he acknowledged her brilliance on camera. Monroe struggled with severe mental illnesses, likely bipolar disorder or borderline personality disorder, chronic anxiety and depression, insomnia, and addiction to barbiturates and alcohol. She was in and out of psychiatric facilities. She attempted suicide multiple times before her death. Hollywood's response? Exploited. They used her instability to control her, suggesting she was too unstable to demand better treatment, while simultaneously profiting from the vulnerability she showed on camera. On August 5, 1962, Marilyn Monroe was found dead in her Los Angeles home. She was 36 years old. Official cause: probable suicide by barbiturate overdose. But the circumstances remain suspicious. Conflicting timelines, missing evidence, rumored affairs with JFK and Robert Kennedy, possible mob connections. We'll probably never know exactly what happened. Here's the most disturbing part. Marilyn Monroe's exploitation never ended. After her death, her image became even more valuable. Andy Warhol's pop art portraits, countless books, films, documentaries, merchandise bearing her image, quotes attributed to her, many fabricated, Halloween costumes, impersonators, and the estate that controls her image has made hundreds of millions of dollars since her death. Meanwhile, the real Norma Jean never got to be taken seriously as an actress, control her own narrative, escape the bombshell persona, live past 36, have the children she desperately wanted, nor find peace. Marilyn Monroe's story isn't about glamour or sex appeal. It's about what happens when an industry sees women as products rather than people. She once wrote in her diary, "I think that sexuality is only attractive when it's natural and spontaneous. I'm personally against a nude body being exploited." Yet her nude calendar photo, taken when she was broke and needed money, was published without permission and became iconic. She had no control. Even her body wasn't her own. Arthur Miller said after her death, "She was a poet on a street corner trying to recite to a crowd pulling at her clothes." Marilyn Monroe is number one on this list, not because she was the most well-endowed, but because her story is the ultimate warning.